Sport Fishing on the Fly is brought to you by Togan's Fly Shop, Maui Jim Sunglasses, and Hardy Rods and Reels. Today on the bench, we're going to tie you up Malcolm Ruddick's UV shrimp. It's one of the best shrimp patterns I've ever used, so make sure you have these materials ready before you tie the fly. For the hook, we'll use a size 12 Scud Pupa hook. We'll tie with some 8/0 olive Nanosilk. We'll use a 3/32 inch gold bead as the bead. For the body, we'll use some UV2 CLX dark olive dubbing, an olive Grizzly micro saddle hackle for the hackle, some small gold wire for the rib, and 1/8 inch olive Midge flex for the tail and back. To start the fly off, I've put the bead onto the hook and of course the small narrow end towards the eyelet. Take my thread and just tie in a quick little mount onto the hook. Now that we have the thread tied on, I'm going to take my fine gold wire. I'm going to start it just behind the bead. And I'm going to work it all the way back. And I'm going to go slightly down the hook bend. Not halfway, but slightly down. And keep the wire off the back for ribbing in later. Now that we have the wire tied in, I'm going to take a small micro saddle hackle. And these are fairly long fibers, but it is still small. And I've peeled off the very ends. And we're going to tie that in. We're now going to take a little bit of our dubbing, and these are longer strands of dubbing. Keep it very thin. Again, just dub on a few strands at a time. Just dub it straight onto your thread. And once you have it dubbed on, we're just going to wrap it forward to form the body. And keep the body fairly thick. You know, shrimp have a thick body. So I usually go over it a couple times. Now that we have the body tied in, I'm going to take my hackle that I've had off the back and I'm going to wrap it forward the opposite direction. I just dub the body in and take about 6 to 7 wraps up just to get some legs on there. Now the hackle's tied in, well, you've got a bunch of extra hackle on top. What we're going to do is just trim right down off the top. And a lot of the side ones you want to leave, the side and the bottom, but just trim kind of right off the top and on a bit of an angle. Now that the body and the hackle's tied in, I'm going to take some of my Midge flex. I'm going to take a loose wrap right behind the bead, and then a couple of tight wraps. Pull that excess forward, take a couple more wraps, and then pull the excess to pull it off, just so it cuts it nice and fine. And then what I'm going to do is one quick whip finish. Just a quick whip on there, on the head, and then I'm going to get my thread out of the way for the next stage. Now that we have our thread out of the way, I'm going to actually pull my Scud back, essentially this Midge flex, back a little bit. Take my wire that I had off the back, and I'm pulling that along the back. I'm going to take one loose wrap. Now don't pull this first one too tight because you're going to wrap your Midge flex too hard. You want to take a real nice wrap, and then the next wrap you're going to tighten up. And then I'm going to take about 6 to 7 wraps up the back and the body. And then tie off right behind the bead. And when you're pulling off your wire, just wiggle it. Just wiggle and slowly pull it, and that'll break the wire off right near behind the bead. Now to finish the fly off, we're actually going to take a couple of whips up at the front, just right behind the bead, just to secure everything in place. Cut off your thread, and then what we're going to do is cut the tail, and we want the tail to be quite small. It's just going to be about as long as the bead, so we want quite a short little tail. on the fly, and you got a choice. You can leave it just like that as a little tag, or you can actually cut it in half. You can actually take it out of the vise, and I usually put a little slice in so it actually forms two tails. So there it is, Malcolm's UV shrimp. As I mentioned earlier, it's one of the best shrimp patterns I've ever used in the fall, especially when we're stripping it on a type 3 line. So make sure you have some in your fly box for the fall.